It was common in the US to have towns and cities where you would have an employer that basically dictated the rules where workers work. They basically set the stage for workers to work where the employer said you should work. And it was still common to have those wages be low and then tell those workers, you could only shop at these stores. These are the stores affiliated with us, kind of like a campus environment.
Connecticut is home to some of the largest American-owned insurance companies. And when you go onto these campuses, they give you everything. They don't have housing, but they do give you everything that you would need. They're trying to get employees to come in, so they want to make it convenient. I had visited one of these insurance companies, and it was lunchtime. And I said, why don't we go out? And they said, no, well, let's stay in our cafeteria. They said that it's frowned upon to leave during a workday.
Hold on.
You're listening to
Welcome to What the Tech, your gateway to business strategies and tech secrets shaping today's workplace.
Rolando, good to see you, man. Hey, do you remember last week you had come out of a meeting and you seemed pretty excited about something, and I asked you what it was, and you said, Dave, it's just a small victory, but sometimes a small.
I remember that.
Something about the small victories.
Right.
A good feeling.
Yeah, take it. When you get a small victory, take it, my man.
Absolutely. Listen, I got a personal small victory that I think hopefully some of our listeners can relate to here. So I've lived in this town for 20 years. I have an infatuation with fresh bread. There's been bakeries that have popped up in my neighborhood, and then I go in thinking there's bread, and it's cakes, cupcakes, it's treats and stuff like that.
You get pulled in by the smell.
You do, but you want to find a place that makes breads. You know, you don't have cakes all the time. It's not a staple. But after 20 years of living here, I just started to ask the question, and people are telling me about this bread place. It's like 3 miles away from my house. They specialize in different sourdoughs, croissants. They have chocolate-filled croissants. The reviews online, you know, people are like, this is the best croissant I've had, better than anything I've ever had in France, and people are jumping on. So I feel like I just discovered the soup Nazi, and now it's the bread, you know, so we have bread, and I'm just so excited, you know, so excited, even though bread prices are not cheap, especially if it's real good quality stuff. But man, I love
no. You know, you remind me of, I used to live in Florida and not far from an Albertsons. So anybody that was around when Albertsons was in the heyday, they used to have fresh French bread that they would roll out. I want to say it was around noonish. So like around lunchtime. It was so the aroma would fill, and it would be like 1 or 2 racks of that they would actually make the bread. There are very few supermarkets that make the bread on premise, but they would make it. They'd roll it out to the front, somewhere in the middle of all the checkout counters, and you could smell the bread. It smelled so good. I'd buy it, and I would be eating it in the parking lot. All I needed was some butter. I'd half of it would make it home with me, and about half of it I'd put, you know, a little butter or something else and eat. Just delicious. I love good bread.
Next time you're invited over to someone's house, Sunday supper, you know, sometimes it's customary to bring a bottle of wine or bring a 12-pack of beer, but I'll tell you bring some fresh bread to a party where it's appropriate, like a nice Sunday dinner, man, you're definitely going to be the hit of the party.
Oh, no doubt.
How much, do you remember how much you paid for bread back then? For that loaf from Albertsons?
I don't even recall, man. I don't even recall how much it was. It couldn't have been too expensive, you know, but I just love the taste. And speaking of bread, I wonder, you're asking me about cost. I wonder what it'd have been like for the dollar to go stretch out, you know, way back in the day. I don't want to say about 100 years. Let me see if ChatGPT's got an answer on that. Let me just put in something here. So 1940. Oh, it does have an answer for it. Look at that. Whoa, Dave, you're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe this. Maybe you will. Back in 1914, bread cost 6 cents in the US, more or less 6 cents. And today it's $2.50. But what's even more surprising, at around 1914, so 6 cents to us seems like nothing. A nickel, right? A nickel.
Sure.
Back then, the average worker that worked for Henry Ford in 1914, where he paid $5 a day, it would only take 6 minutes of their work hour, 6 minutes to pay for such breads. So 6 minutes, 6 cents. So they're getting paid about a penny a minute. And today, with the minimum wage at $7.25, it would take 21 minutes to buy a bread that costs $2.50. They're not buying that artisanal stuff that's down the street from you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, at best, you're going to get some Wonder Loaf, some Wonder Bread, maybe the giant size Wonder Bread. But I'll tell you, man, I've poked in and out of like dollar stores, Dollar General. First of all, nothing's a buck anymore, and yeah, $2.50, that might get you pretty basic bread. That's interesting. So, I mean, Henry Ford's a pretty interesting guy, super progressive. He was an ally for the American workers, right? He fought for he fought for a minimum wage, federal minimum wage, but he had set his minimum wage at what did he set that at?
So he paid his workers around $5 an hour, and if that equates to around 62 cents per minute. Is that right?
No, I don't think that was $5 an hour.
$5 a day. That would have been awesome back then. It was $5 a day. It'd be good to read what ChatGPT put out for $5 per day and
60 something cents an hour.
About 62 cents an hour. And he, in 1914, instilled the 8-hour work week at his assembly lines, at his factories. He was ahead. I mean, the minimum wage was not established in the U.S. until 1924. But let's talk about Henry Ford. There we go, Ori. Thanks for putting it up. So if you're following us on the video side, we got some nostalgic throwback to that era. Henry Ford did something that was not common back in 1914, just over 100 years ago, which was his philosophy was that he wanted his workers to be able to afford the cars he made, which is crazy back then, given that not that long ago, this country had been through the Civil War and this fight for slavery and all that. So just off of the backs of that, not too long from he said, you know what? I'm going to do something different. I'm going to have workers that can also work an 8-hour work week, which was uncommon back in those days. And so this standard was not yet widely adopted because it wasn't really until the 1940s, after the World War II, where we had some rights and some movements towards establishing some kind of worker minimum wage and some standards around the work week and how long we should work within the week. So he was at least 30 years ahead of his time when it came to employment and when it came to workers, when it came to their wages and how they work.
That's insane to me. You know, it's humbling to think that it took so long for employees to figure out, hey, the happier our employees are, the more we can take care of them, the more they're going to be more productive, employee retention, just happy, people that are actually bringing something of value to the table. Why did it take so long? Everyone was just work, what am I saying? Hands to the grind.
Say something like
knuckles,
that, right?
Something, yeah. I mean, why was Henry Ford the first one to start thinking about happy employees and the value that it would bring?
I don't know the exact reason why, but I could take a guess at it. The automobile was a new thing, a new invention still in the early 1900s. He had competitors. And if you're trying to find an advantage in the labor pool, in the marketplace, and set yourself apart, you got to find either you get the best product or the cheapest product, or you say, we're going to have the best workers to make the best product, right? Because back then the output was directly related and correlated to the workers that worked on the assembly line. What if workers made errors? Put the wrong lug nut, put the wrong parts in the car. They put things backwards or reverse. All of those errors cost money. And still today, errors in the medical field, these kinds of errors, medical errors are generated because people are overworked. They work too long, their shifts or whatever. Those things add up, in terms of liability and cost and untold sadness to people that are on the end result of medical errors. So why not have workers, in the case of Henry Ford's time, have workers that are in the assembly line and can produce at a rate that is healthy for the bottom line as well as for the worker.
True. And, in that industry back in 1914. Is that what we're saying?
Yep.
1914. He had a lot of competition. So it was Ford, GM, Dodge Brothers,
Was it
Chrysler,
Studebaker? Was it their company?
Studebaker. Yeah, Studebaker was certainly snuck in there. Now, I think that they were all kind of in that same area, right? In that
No,
Detroit,
yeah, the upper
Michigan
Midwest.
area.
Yeah, the Midwest, the upper Midwest became the hotbed for the auto industry. So I
Right.
could also imagine that there were, trying to get the best workers. I can only imagine because if he's paying, let's say, 62 cents an hour, which is what $5 a day comes out to. In 19, I think it was in 1934, 1938, when Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standard Act, that established the federal minimum wage, and it was at 25 cents an hour. So 1914 to 1938, that's 24 years later. He
Wow.
was so far ahead that at 1914 he paid 3x, three times the labor rate that the federal government established in 1938. Can you imagine how many people tried to get into that factory and work
No
as a
kidding.
worker there? And can you
Hey.
imagine the life changing quality of life that those people that managed to work at those factories for Henry Ford
Mhm.
would have had, being able to command three, and probably if you adjusted it for inflation, could have been between 3 and 4 times. Because again, 24 years before the federal minimum wage established at 25 cents an hour, he was paying 62. So
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
people could live a very good life. And why wouldn't they be loyal? The workplace was totally different than it is today, but they would be loyal to Henry Ford's cause and making the best automobiles in the world.
Mm. I wonder if that was driven by competition. One of the things that I love about capitalism is competition drives innovation. So I wonder if Henry Ford was competing for employees or he was always progressive. Um, but that's why I love these competing industries because people want to do more to attract that workforce. There's a lot of there's a lot of options today, but even right there, just in that particular market, there was a lot of options. They were centralized geographically. They were all competing for automobile production and sales. I'd like to dig a little bit deeper in this when it makes sense to see, more about, the sales of Ford and the competitors, just to see if there was a correlation between productivity and paying more for the employees, more for the
Yeah, I think
workforce.
I think back then, and we're gonna talk to economist Nick Bloom here soon, and he can give us the exact numbers because economists tend to know these things. But I believe that back in the day, it was more common to pay by the widget. So if you produced 10
Hmm,
widgets a day, you got paid by the widget. And that turned out to
right.
not be the best model because the incentive is just to crank out widgets, whether they're good,
Yep.
bad, or otherwise. So your quality assurance could go down the tubes, right? If I
Yes.
know I'm going to get paid $1 a widget. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know when you have hundreds of workers what they want to do, right?
Absolutely. Yep. They're gonna crank out crap at that point.
Yeah. But the backdrop to this, Dave, I know for a fact that before Henry Ford started paying that $5 an hour, it was common in the US to have towns and cities where you would have an employer that basically dictated the rules where workers worked and what they did with that money. So they basically set the stage for workers to work where the employer said you should work, near or around the place, close by. And it was still common to have those wages be low and then tell those workers, you can only shop at these stores because these are the stores affiliated with us, kind of like a
Hmm,
campus environment, if we were to call that, where, you go to your bread store. That bread store is connected to us. You go take your dollars over there or whatever they used, and you go over there to this meat place, and that's the place to be, or to shop. And so the
right.
employers weighed heavily on how the work was done, where the workers were doing the work, And basically the fabric of life for those workers was their employment location because
Right.
everything revolved around that. And that got me to thinking about today on, where we are in this moment in history, that people are saying, "Hey, it's time for something different." It's time. If I do work here on a keyboard like this one, I do it anywhere, right? I don't. I'm
Right.
not at a factory stamping out parts and tires and an assembly line. And for people that need to do that work, obviously they need to be in person. But for
Right.
everyone else that's in what I would call the keyboard economy, they could probably do that anywhere you can get an internet connection today, right?
Mhm.
So, how did we get here, Dave, with this 5-day work week, 8-hour work week? Why not 6? Why not 7? Why not 4?
Uh, well, I know that we know people that do work multiple jobs or they're not part of the keyboard economy and they are working, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. But listen, I want to tell you something. The Harvard Business Review, they did a study recently and there's some sobering facts in here.
Go ahead.
Employees in this keyboard economy, did you know that we switch between 22 different apps nearly 1,200 times daily?
Woo! What?
Let it sink
That's a
in.
lot of switching, Dave.
Look, listen, it happened to me earlier today. We were working on writing a script. Something had diverted my attention, and it did. It took me a couple of minutes. That mental juggling of getting back to the other task, it's something that people are doing often. Now, it takes its toll on employees. It increases stress. It slows productivity. It really undermines focus. So now here comes Global Tech Worldwide. Global Tech Worldwide has over 2 decades of experience in business communications. They've mastered the art of unifying communication tools from voice to SMS, video, email, more. When you integrate these disparate systems, they cut through the clutter and it reduces the effects of context switching.
Makes sense. That makes sense. That's
Um,
right.
so, in this age of optimization, efficiency isn't a dream, it's a reality with Global Tech. Book an appointment and talk with Global Tech about your needs. You can find them at global-tech.com. That's global-tech.com. Check them out. They can help tie together some of your systems, help with efficiency, and reduce the effects of context switching, like a lot of us are doing all the time. But as we get back into that, we were talking about
We were talking about about how did we end up with this 5-day work week, right?
right.
And while you were doing the read, I'm just looking at something here where in 1916, the Adamson Act was enacted in response to a nationwide railway strike. And it had the potential to disrupt the whole freaking economy. Take it down, Dave, because everything moved by rail. And to
Mhm.
avoid further labor unrest, it says that the government passed this law establishing the 8-hour workday and overtime pay for railroad workers. And I would imagine at that point, the groundwork was laid down, right? So if you're going to give railroad workers, I'm having a hard time saying railroad workers. My tongue can't say that. Railroad workers, you give them that right because of the law. You say, okay, what about factory workers? What about farm workers? I'm thinking of the 30s, or no, 1916. So farm workers, factory workers, and other workers in other parts of the economy, they got to be
Mhm.
scratching their head.
Manufacturing.
Why can't I do that? Right?
Yeah.
I
Well,
should
and then
be. No, go ahead.
if I was making if I had an opportunity back then to have a job that had a fair wage that allowed me to kind of have some of this work life blend, like it's funny, it's not a foreign concept to us in 2023, work life balance, work life blend.
Hmm.
But 19 nineteen
16.
sixteen, that was in 16, that was just a foreign idea. It's like, no, you work until you die. Work
I,
as much as you can. You're
I read somewhere
miserable.
it was common to have a 70-hour work week. It was common.
Ooh.
And a lot of these early factories in the US, They employed a lot of women,
Mm-hmm.
textile factories, and the working conditions weren't great. And I can only imagine if we go back to our Henry Ford thing, if he says, "I've established I planted a flag here where my workers are 8 hours a day and 5 days a week," he had to be one of the earliest corporate titans of the time that is establishing a standard. I mean, whether he knew it or not, that would influence only 2 years later this act of 1916. I'm sure he played a small role in some of that because Ford is a big corporate titan. His cars are
Sure.
everywhere, right? And so I don't know. I don't know if everything could be attributed to him, but I'm sure somebody may have drawn some inspiration there from what he was doing, right? And established that 8 hour workday because it's what Henry Ford had been doing just 2 years before that.
Sure. Well, I'm sure that his competitors had no choice but to follow suit. Why work over here for $2, 6, 7 days a week when you can make double over here and have some time off to be a person and raise a family and live your life? Life shouldn't be work. What did you say at the beginning of this uh, session? Off recording, you had mentioned Americans live
We live
to
to
work.
work. We live to work. Other parts of the world seem to be on a different page when it comes to work. And I was
Mm,
listening to a webinar yesterday with a bunch of people talking about the differences in different parts of the world. And we're still far behind our European counterparts when it comes to non-work things like, hanging out with our family, taking vacations, enjoying just the day. And I'm out of work. Boom. We don't talk about it anymore because this is my free time, and I like to do X. I like to hang out. I like to enjoy the nature, whatever. Um, so it's definitely more American, and more to live to work. And I think we may be just turning that corner a little bit within the last couple of years. People are starting to reevaluate. I think that's why this is such a big deal for people when it comes to flexible work.
sure.
But Dave, it doesn't end there because there's more. There's more when we're looking at this and trying to understand. Okay, so the flag was planted early. Was it widely adopted? And it did not take off that 8 hour work week. Even though the railroad workers got that into law, it wasn't really until 1938. We were just touching on this a little bit. 1938, Dave. That's when the Fair Labors and Standards Act was passed and signed by President Roosevelt. So it took 24 years after
Wow.
after Ford had come in, and then it took 22 years when when the other act was passed. Let me go back here. When the Adamson's Act was passed to then establish a minimum federal wage. And at that, it was established at 25 cents, a lowly 25, a low bar, a very low bar at
Big time
25
low.
cents an hour. When again, some 20 plus years prior to that,
20.
Ford was already paying his workers three times,
Yeah.
62 cents.
So it was, so 24 years earlier, he was paying them over 60. Is that what we said? 60
62
cents
cents. It
an
works
hour?
out to 62 cents an hour. Mhm.
62 cents an hour, 24 years earlier than the first federally signed minimum wage of 25 cents an hour.
And I think for inflation purposes, for folks listening, what does that represent? $5 a day is roughly 100. Let me do my math here. 154 hours. If you're using the calculators that
Mm,
adjust for inflation, it works out
no,
to
you
about
said out
154. 100. I want to pay workers more. $154 a day, Dave. I keep saying an hour. That'd be awesome. We'd all be rich if we could make $154 an hour, but $154 a day. And going back to our bread analogy, milk. Get this, Dave. Milk back in the day, 1914, when workers were making at Ford, $5 a day, milk was 12 cents. 12 cents. So it would take a worker 12 minutes based on that $5 a day at the Ford plant, 12 minutes to buy a gallon of milk.
That's crazy. I bought a gallon of whole milk the other day. I don't usually buy milk. I think it was over $4. About
Yep.
$4 for that gallon of milk.
And so just doing some quick math based on the 725 minimum, that would be something close to 30 minutes to
Mm-hmm.
buy that gallon of milk. That's crazy that in 1914, you could buy a gallon of milk and it would take the worker at Ford 12 minutes. And today's worker in America, at earning seven and a quarter, which is the minimum wage, 30 minutes, half an hour. So it takes longer to buy that gallon of milk than it did in the 1914.
Sheesh.
Hmm?
What happened? Where are all the good times gone? I thought we were progressive and we were moving forward. Everyone knows that the dollar is not going as far as it used to go, but this is very eye-opening for sure.
Well, indeed, indeed, and I think that that speaks a little bit. Some most of the folks that are making 725 an hour are not the ones benefiting from remote work. Let's also state that,
Sure.
right? They're not. But I think it also speaks to a larger feeling that we're all feeling right now for a lot of workers that are white collar workers in the keyboard economy. And that is like what you said, Dave. The dollar isn't going as far as it probably used to. And one of the biggest things that a worker can do, and I was hearing Nick Bloom talk about this recently, was that it's an immediate pay raise to the employee when you're able to work from home because you're saving gas, you're saving the need to go dry clean weekly, you're saving
Sure.
the need to pay for lunch while you're at work. All of these things add up, and anywhere between $25 to $40 a day that you're easily spending on moving back and forth or commuting. It's not cheap to take the Long Island Railroad to from Long Island into the city, or from Tarrytown down to the city, or from Newark into the city. It's not cheap to
Sure.
go into San Jose and do that commute every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the Bay
Yep.
Area. And so people are saying, you know what? I can put a little more money back in my pocket. And at the same time, employers benefit from productivity gains because employees are happier. And there's some parallels there. And that was the thing that motivated me today. Do we have some parallels and some patterns? Because human behavior doesn't change a whole lot, Dave. I studied psychology in college. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that you and I are not so different than the people from 200, 300, 500 years ago. They want to be loved. They want to be safe. People want to be secure. People still want to be respected. And they want meaningful work. They want their work to be dignified. That is still the same today as it was 100 years ago, 400 years ago, whether you were on a farm and you're raising crops or you're in a factory line. You want to have dignified work, right? And that's what people were trying to fight for back in the day. And today, it's not about factories so much, although the guys and gals that are on strike today in the US, again, we're repeating a bit what happened in the 60s where there was a lot of strikes. We'll get to that in a minute. But can we learn anything from these patterns? And it seems like we can, because people are wanting the same thing. They didn't want to stay in those company towns that the company dictated back in the early 1900s, late 1800s.
Yep.
Workers did want better living. They wanted healthy working conditions or safe working conditions.
Mm-hmm.
We saw that as we were doing some research here, that there were factories like textile factories that had very unsanitary and unsafe conditions. All these things push the work week changes to the forefront. Fighting for the rights to work a minimum wage, fighting for um, you know, uh, not working over 70 hours a week. child labor laws that went into effect. And I think all of these started shaping our work week. And it wasn't until the 40s that that standard finally started to stick. Highways started going in after World War II, suburbs were being built, and people in cities changed. Workers started now living in the suburbs. They started coming in to the city for work. And that was the norm, the 40-hour work week for those people.
I feel like we've come a long way in a short period of time. So, just to recap, we didn't have a federal minimum wage until 1938, less than 100 years ago. That's two generations, three generations. It's like, when you learn about history, sometimes when I'm learning about history and I'm doing some real basic numbers, I've been watching Yellowstone has two prequel stories. 19, I think one's called 1928 and one's called 1889 or something like that. But you do you're looking at this period of time and they didn't have the technology. They were just getting cars. And when you do the math, you're like, oh, that was 100 years ago, 100 years ago, 110 years ago. So in such a short period of time, we've now come to this new keyboard economy. We've adopted the 5-day work week. We have good working conditions. We're safe. We have workers' comp insurance. That was something that we didn't really do a lot of research on, but that had come up around that same time of Henry Ford between 1914 and 1938. Workers' comp somehow became a standard.
It
Became
became
a
a thing.
mandate. But some people think that was a million years ago. That was at the same time with dinosaurs. And it's like that was actually not long ago at all. So when you relate it, when you're like, you know what, we today here in 2023, we're still human. We feel the same way as the people did then. The job market was different. We respect that, but it's still that wanting to do meaningful work, wanting to be a provider to our families, wanting to have a family, wanting to have free time, this balance. And
Right.
of its progressive nature, people are continuing to ask for more and have more conversations. People are now talking about the 4-day work week.
Well, there's studies. There's studies. Oh, and I can't wait for Professor Nick Bloom to come and school us on that. There are studies that right now there's several hundred companies around the world participated in, and they did a 4-hour work week, and they all did it a little bit different, where either the hours were front loaded, or they worked the same amount of hours each day, or they did an equivalent of 40,
Hmm.
or they reduced down to 32 hours and then spread that out. No matter how they did it, almost all the participants in this study saw gains from a 4-hour work week, and it's gaining traction in different pockets around the world and in different organizations because of the productivity gains. And I would imagine in high labor markets, in terms of the cost, like we're in a tight labor market in the U.S. In a lot of parts of Europe, where your cost of employment is higher relative to Asian countries or Latin American countries. If you can gain productivity without having to add headcount, you would do that as an executive. You'd be like, boom, push that button. And we're in that point right now where we may be shifting to a whole new type of work week. 5 work week was the standard from the 40s. Well, actually, let's go back to 1914. So we give some credit back to Henry Ford for starting it. But that's over 100 years ago, right? The economy of this whole world was different. So why shouldn't we revisit that playbook, right? If I were to put it in a football or sports terminology, let's look at the playbook. Is this the best option to make profits today? If I'm looking at this as a CEO, is this the best playbook to have happy employees, to have retention, to have
Hmm.
productivity? Is this the best playbook for that? You have to ask yourself the question, well, how did we get here? And I think we've provided a little bit of that. But then where can we go? Because we certainly are not in 1914. We're not in 1936. We're not even in 1960, Dave. We're in 2023. There were no keyboards back in 1914. There was no internet, right? There were no cell phones. There was no Zoom. There was no Teams. There was no ability to do what you and I are doing right now. We're talking
Yeah,
hundreds of miles
unbelievable.
apart, and we're able to get work done, right? And we can work simultaneously on something, a product, an idea, right? A collaboration. It could take instantly. We can have collaboration that didn't exist back then. So shouldn't
Right.
we, as an economy, as leaders, as a society, really have that discussion about what should work look like for the next 100 years, right? We did
Right.
this for 100 years, 5-day work week, 8 hours a day, and that was productive. That was better than before, right?
Yep.
What's better than today, right? And I think we had Sandeep, the former president of BlackBerry, come in and he said, that's what it takes to win. You want to win, you have to ask yourself, as a curious leader, what does it take to win? How can we be more productive? What's the best playbook going forward? It may not be that 5-day work week. It may be something different. But if you're not curious enough, I don't think you open yourself up to the possibility that there's a better play than the one we ran for the last 100 years.
Right. Yeah. And when Sandeep was speaking about curiosity, we have more data available at our fingertips today than at any time in history. So if you're an
True.
analyst, if you're a money person, the numbers are out there. You can gather them, you can analyze it. What I find interesting is when you consider Sandeep, he was like naturally an employee advocate. And when we think about some CEOs today that are implementing the return to office policies, I feel like they're strong holding the workforce. They're neglecting all of this data that's at their fingertips, and they're more of an adversary. So they're butting heads with their workers, and they are the bully. They are saying this is the mandate, and they're trying to drive it down people's throats. And then when you think about Sandeep, he was completely the opposite. When you think about Henry Ford, it was the opposite of that. He
Right.
was already thinking about his workers. And I'm just wondering, when we take some of these people that are so quick to say, you know what, wrap your head around this, everybody, you're coming back to the office. I think there could be, but also on the flip side, when I think about the auto unions right now that are really fighting for this 4-day work week, they are being the tough guy in the room. They are being the bully in the room because they can understand what would happen to a manufacturer if things halt. It's funny. We're finally kind of through this pandemic, manufacturing, and we have product and all this, and now the workers are like, oh no, we're actually a very important piece to this, and now we're going to put our foot down and we're going to stand up for ourselves. There needs to be a common interest on both ends for success. And I like Sandeep's thinking. I like Henry Ford's thinking. And it's completely the opposite of, Musk and
Well, he called it morally wrong. Those were his
he
words.
called it morally wrong. Yep. And I don't know if he was considering one part of his workforce, the engineers, the people that are there on site, the ones that are hands-on. Yeah, those folks obviously can't be working at home, but there's still so
There's
many people.
accountants, there's salespeople, right?
Oh,
They're in an
the
organization
keyboard.
that as large as that, you're going to have various roles. And something that I'm just going to go back to what I heard just yesterday in a conference call with a bunch of leaders that were talking about remote work. They were talking about Stanford University, and they were talking about how Stanford has obviously they have professors, they have students, they have people that work in craft services or
Yeah.
making food or
Yeah,
security
facility,
guards, landscapers,
facilities people, security,
facilities, right?
yeah,
So
IT.
IT, all of the rest. So they have a lot. They have like 20,000 employees. What's fascinating, Dave, is that Stanford allows for all three versions of work: totally in
Hmm.
person for all those people that have to be there.
Nope.
And some of those people are also professors because they also want to be in the classroom. Uh, they also have people that are completely remote now. Like that's it. They've gone 100% remote. Maybe they lived further away from the university and love, staying away, not making that commute. And then they have hybrid. Some people that come in and out, that are employees that are there for a couple days and then work the other days at their at home. And it really got
Yeah.
me to thinking about how, oh, interesting. The needs for different roles, like you're talking about, in an organization are different. And so mandating just a 3-hour work week, return to office, or 4-day return to office, or even 5-day, you got to be all on in person, doesn't really speak to the moment of where we're at right now. Some workers that are young, as was pointed out in this conference, some workers that are young, they do want to go in person. If you
Yep.
live and it's very common for, Latino households. It's very common in some Asians household, especially a lot of immigrant households. You'll have multi generational folks living under one roof,
Hmm.
and imagine sharing everything under one roof and everybody fighting for that Wi-Fi. You don't want to do that if you got to get on a Zoom call. So you want to go into the office. But let's on the other side of the spectrum, right? Maybe you have a home, you've got space, you've got a kid or two or three, and one of them's sick. You want to be able to work from home when you need to. You want to be, or you have a loved one that's not well. You want to be able to care for them for an extended period of time. So the needs of the workers are different. You're an empty nester. If you're an empty nester, I'm sure your needs are going to be different than the guy or gal that just graduated from college and started working for Tesla, or working for Goldman, or working for Google, or working for Nike, right? So I think that flexibility model is interesting, but I would imagine that's why Nick Bloom is in high demand, because how do you pull that off, right? If you have various workers, different roles, how do you set those policies? And we don't have a lot of muscle memory for this, but I would imagine that those curious leaders, those CEOs that are like I want the bottom line, I want the top talent. I think they're going to figure it out. I think HR departments are going to be able to figure it out, but it is going to take a new playbook.
Right. Right. I think about young organizations who are hiring. They're hiring people from school, so they have some entry level jobs. They're hiring kids out of college, early
Hmm.
early 20s. In my opinion, it's so important for those folks to have mentors that have been in the business for 10 plus years so that they can just get a better idea about the organization, how business is done, what a meeting, how to conduct yourselves within a meeting,
Right.
just mentorship. And I'm thankful that I had an opportunity back in 2000 to have an office, to go in, to be part of this community of people, because I certainly learned from them. And I think that that's a big part of. I feel that some leaders feel that that is going to get missed. The mentorship might fall to the wayside if everyone is working remotely. But with the technology that's available, I think that there would be ways to create a culture where we can still talk amongst each other, even if it's not walking into the office and running into them, grabbing a coffee in the coffee area or lunch. But I got to say, I am concerned about the workers who had to start jobs during this pandemic and they're starting it at home. The reality, because then we actually were talking about this the other day, the younger generation that started in the workforce during the pandemic with the freedom of working remotely, maybe they moved further away from the office. But when
Hmm.
that company starts mandating, all right, it's time to come back in, and then those younger people are now getting an idea of, oh my goodness, so it's 8 hours of work. plus 3 hours of commuting, plus $30 for breakfast and lunch, minus social life, minus all these other pieces. You give up a lot when you are mandated 100% to be in the office,
Yeah,
and it's
no,
a
no doubt.
reality check.
And I think there was something in I think I want to say it was the Times or the Post or maybe it was on LinkedIn that I saw this. Somebody posted that uh, one of the biggest contributors right now to relocation is folks that are reverse migration. They moved away during the pandemic because they thought they could remote work for forever, and they're
Yeah.
having to move back in closer to town or closer to the city. And a good chunk of those people that are doing that are upside down in their equity in their home. So they're selling for
Yep.
a
Believe
loss.
it.
So it's not a good thing right now. I would say for those workers that are having to come back to the office because of the mandate, because they either leave leave, leave or come back to work where we tell you to work, which is an interesting parallel, Dave, what we were talking about earlier. The company towns of the late 1800s. That's exactly what they mandated. You work here, we tell you where to work, or you shop at these places. That's what's affiliated with us. So this feels a little bit like, obviously it's not exactly the same, but conceptually the idea of the employer mandating where you should work sounds a lot like the late 1800s when employers exerted that much influence over towns and cities in America.
Yeah.
It's
You
incredible.
know,
It's incredible. It's a new day, but it sounds a lot alike.
I didn't live during that era, but if that gave the people a sense of stability, if you lived and you worked and you spent your earnings all within this area, I don't know if that's a form of socialism, but it provided some stability. People are always looking for stability when it comes to work. It's always been something that's been discussed. People want to know that they have a job tomorrow. They don't want to think that world is always ending and this might be our last paycheck. But it's an interesting concept, kind of keeping that spending, together. I think about some of these large insurance companies that are near me. So I'm based in southern New Hampshire. I'm in New England. Connecticut is right near us. Connecticut is home to some of the largest
Yeah.
American owned insurance companies. And when you go on to these campuses, they give you everything. They don't have housing, but they do give you everything that you would need. They give you a bank, they give
Do
you
they have
a
artisanal
restaurant,
bread,
or
Dave?
did they give you the maybe artisanal bread? Hey, that what? Now they're speaking my language. They're trying to get employees to come in, so they want to make it convenient. Want to make it convenient. I had visited one of these insurance companies 8 years ago, and it was lunchtime. And I said, "Why don't we go out? Like, are we gonna go out and grab a bite?" And they said, "No, no, no. Well, let's stay in our cafeteria." I'm like, "Oh, okay." I thought there actually is right in this particular area. There's a New York deli. There's a New York Jewish deli that has like the best Reuben sandwiches, the
Ooh.
best bread, the marble
Ooh.
rye. Forget about it. I wanted to go get one of these Reuben sandwiches with their homemade marble rye
See, now that's
breads.
your problem. Mine was
That's
railroad. I want to say railroad. Railroad.
but
Caton. Railroad.
what was funny was they said that it's frowned upon to leave during the workday.
Hold on,
And
hold
this
on, hold on. Hold on. Dave, say that again. Did I what? Did I, what hold on. What?
What?
It is frowned upon to leave?
I was told part of them providing you all the comforts of life under one roof, banking, haircuts,
Mhm.
no grocery stores, but there was multiple food options, the gym, everything. They really were doing that. They didn't want you to leave the office. It was almost like these these employee towns that we're talking about, they
Yep.
wanted to keep all the money kind of circulating within the walls of
I could
the
see it
business.
cutting both ways, right? You could argue we do this for the convenience of our employees, so they don't have to worry about driving and getting in their car and
Sure.
going over here and going over there. But you could also see that it's a very clever way to also just keep employees very close to work,
Mm.
right? I mean, it's
It
great.
was
It
like the
has some benefits
unspoken.
of convenience, but it also is like, why can't I go to this other restaurant? Why can't I go to, I don't know, XYZ place? That's Red Lobster. I don't know,
Right.
just throwing a name. Red Lobster. I love Red
And you
Lobster
certainly
because of the
could.
greasy
You s-
lobsters,
you
right?
s- ugh, Red Lobster. I think the only ones left are down in Connecticut or Rhode Island. That's not getting the same
And up in
reaction
your
out of
way where
me.
you have really good lobsters, I'm surprised they're even around.
Yeah, they don't exist here. I I've been to a Red Lobster once. It was in Rhode Island, and I almost think I went online a couple years ago, and that was the only one around. We have commercials for Red Lobster. They don't exist. We have commercials for Sonic. I've never seen a Sonic in any of the states here in New England. You got Sonics down there? Anyway.
Yeah, we do. We
No,
do. No, but you were
but
saying
yeah,
that
so
all these nice, beautiful perks that some of these company offer, it's frowned that you should leave the facilities.
yeah, it was like you don't want your manager to see you going out to your car in the middle of the day during a lunch break. It
That's
was
no
just
good.
it was just
That's just
frowned
no
upon.
good, right? It's
Yeah.
great that the stuff is there, but again, why can't what's like from a worker standpoint? Why would you want to be limited in your options on where you want to eat? It's your
Hmm.
30 minutes break time, hour, whatever that work deems necessary for you to take a break for lunch. Take it the way you want to take it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe you have a particular food that you can eat. And there's a lot of people today that have allergies to all kinds of things, right? And maybe you can't eat what's being served there.
I agree.
Interesting take. That's a That's a it does sound, I'm telling you, it sounds just like these company towns. And it's an interesting parallel. But I think people, even with that, even with all of those perks, Dave, and as beautiful as Stanford's campus is, like what I was hearing at this webinar, some people say, no, I can make my own lunch. I can make it the way I want to. And not only that, the perk for me working from home, I have my own private bathroom. I don't have to share with anybody.
Facts.
Right? I don't
Holy
gotta share that
moly.
with anybody.
I never said that out loud, but I'm saying that out loud as well. Yeah, it's not exactly private, but it's certainly is not public. Ugh, the little things in life, the small victories, Rolando.
The small victories. So yeah, so we'll take this small victory and let workers and employers know, that there are other avenues. I encourage you to uh, look into Professor Nick Bloom's work. There's so many others that are doing exciting work and research around this field. And I heard something encouraging. If we want to leave our folks, our audience, with something encouraging, he said in this webinar that I was on yesterday that he had a conversation with the CEO of Goldman, and he said something that really struck me. Was that he said the sale to the CEO and the C-suite is actually very easy. It's
Hmm.
not as hard as we think it is. He said that managers in the mid-level managers are the ones that have experienced most of this difficulty, but the CEOs, they get it. They understand productivity. Productivity doesn't go down as a result of remote work and flexible work, and Professor Bloom's got all the data around that to support that. And it's great for the bottom line. And Dave, it's great for worker retention. In this tight labor economy, recruiting new workers is harder. And the
Yeah.
last thing he said, which was impressive, he's like, if you care about the world and you want to leave this a better place, it's greener. So it's great for the planet, right? And so that's an easy sell to a CEO that's making decisions based on data. And so I offer that up to our audience because if you want to dive into Professor Bloom's work, please do. There's a lot of great information out there that he has on studies from around the world with different organizations experimenting with flexible work, hybrid work, remote work, all of the above. And it could serve as a guidepost for where your organization needs to be when it comes to this very, very hot topic right now.
Right. I'm wondering if middle management is less attracted to the idea of remote and hybrid work because it will be up to them to implement the strategy for motivation, productivity, mentoring. Um, they have a lot of things that they need to change. They'll be the ones that are touching the people. I shouldn't say it like that. They're the ones that are close to the actions of the employees. So it would be up to them to kind of implement
Mhm.
just the process of everything.
Yeah. Usually they're the implementers, right? They're the implementers, and in some cases right now, the enforcers. There's several companies that have now given the green light for um, managers to terminate employment based on lack of attendance and adherence to the mandate for 3 or 4 day work weeks. And some have also made it part of a performance review. So it
Hmm.
could lead to termination if you are not going and checking in or swiping your badge at the building that you're assigned to. So it's going to be very interesting, Dave. I think if history's taught us anything, once workers get a taste of some freedom and rights, like we talked about in the 1914, 1930s, 1940s, they're going to want that to go into perpetuity. And we're at that point where what's going to happen? Are we going to stay at a 4 day work week or go to a 4 day work week? We're going to stay five. Are we going to see way more hybrid? All of the above? I don't know, but it's certainly a very interesting time right now.
Does does the New York Stock Exchange, all right, so if you're a publicly traded organization here in the States, you're operating at a 4-day work week, but you're trading 5 days a week. Is there what is the correlation between stock being exchanged and sold and bought and the work week? I always thought, my wife had asked me, she's like, why, what would happen if it was 4 days a week? And I just went right to the stock exchange. I'm like, I think this is where the paranoia is. It's the shareholders. We're trading 5 days a week. How can you trade 5 days a week, but you're only working 4 days a week? What's the correlation between that?
I don't know, Dave, but I could tell you this. This is just anecdotal. And I remember the first time we were doing business with companies in Europe and Israel, and August rolls around. You know that in Europe, the people in Europe, they get they get 2, 3, sometimes 4 weeks of yearly vacation, right?
Mm,
Way more than
that
here.
they
And
take
actually
all at the
part of
exact same time.
and they all go at the same time. Now, if it were the case that workers going on vacation for an extended period of time was bad, a lot of companies, big and small, would go under every single year when all these employees go on their extended vacation.
Yeah,
And it doesn't
true.
happen. We in the US think that way because we are programmed to think if I'm not at my cell phone, at my computer, at my desk, if I'm not immersed in work, that's bad. That's bad. And it's bad for the organization. And that mentality is from the top down, right? From leaders all the way down to the entry level person, that mindset is pervasive. But I remind you of Europeans and countries in the Middle East, also in Latin America, they go on extended vacation and things
Hmm.
do not fall apart. Those companies come back after vacation and they keep doing business because people know and understand there's a rhythm to the work that's this way. We're
Right.
trying to make some of those changes. We don't have, I would love if there was a 4-week mandate in the law in the US, because then people may not feel so stressed out about work. I mean, there's
True.
some benefits and some cons, but in the end, business won't fall apart if we go with a 4-day work week, because we will all eventually adjust, right? We went to a 5-day work week. Things didn't fall apart. We actually had some of the biggest booms in American history
Yep. That's right.
that followed after World War II in the 40s when this was instituted, right? The sky did not fall. That's what I'm trying to say. Once the 5-day work week was adopted, became the norm, the 8-hour work week became the norm, the sky did not fall. We experienced enormous prosperity as a country during that period after World War II. I
Mm.
think, I think this is just me. It's quite possible we could see a huge productivity boom with some of the numbers that are out today around the 4-day work week that I've seen. So we'll have to see how many organizations actually incorporate that into their organization.
When do our employees start asking us when we'll start implementing a 4-day work week? One thing I do want to leave you with is it's interesting that back in 1914, auto industry, right? Henry Ford fighting, for a federally mandated minimum wage. Here we are in 2023, same industry, the auto workers industry. The auto work, I don't know the name of
Mm,
the union, but they
UAW?
are, it's the same industry and they are looking for they have some very aggressive requests that include a 4-day work week. So we'll keep our ear to the ground. It's just crazy
It's
that it
interesting,
happens to
Dave.
be the same industry yeah,
It's a good pickup. The
yeah.
same
I wonder
industry,
what it is
those
about that
workers.
industry. Hmm. And again, they're not. It's not the keyboard economy. The keyboard economy. I think we have more opportunity to have flexible hours, 4-day work weeks. I like flexible hours. I actually knew someone very early on. Their business did 4 10-hour work days, and he loved it. Everyone he worked with, they loved that job,
Mm.
and they didn't mind working. They just banked it all together. So they did the 4 10-hour days, still being very productive. They weren't working them to the bone. Quality work was there. The business still is there today. I was just talking to him recently. They still work those hours. Again, they're not giving people 32-hour work weeks, but they're also recognizing that they can get a little more for less and keep productivity, keep their product quality, but also take good care of their employees. And the employees are still, they send out satisfaction. This guy's in HR. So they send out employee satisfaction surveys. And yeah, it's a it's a low paying or a low skill factory, but they do things kind of out of the norm so that they can just keep their employees happy, so that they can have all those things that Henry Ford was mentioning: retain employees, keep them happy, and keep them safe and normal, and better quality of life than their competitors.
Somebody agrees with you on that.
Real life.
Absolutely, DJ Khaled. Real life. We want to thank you for hanging in there on this episode of work productivity, and where did we start with this 5-day work week and the origins around that. And if you want more and you want to nerd out on more facts about remote work, flexible work, I invite you to go check out the episode where Dr. Ellen Frank Miller, formerly of the University of Chicago, shared numbers around workers and how they contribute to the bottom line when they're happy. So go check that episode out with Dr. Ellen, and Dave and I will see you in that episode. Now, if you're on YouTube, we've got some extra videos up on the screen right over here. Dave and I will share some knowledge on how you can grow your business faster. And Dave and I will join you in those videos as well. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll see you next time.